with a falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it, or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast, Skeptic Studio. In this episode, I talked to a relatively well-known Canadian leftist, Rob Rousseau. Rob got semi-famous by tweeting in response to Donald Trump's claim about MS-13 members being a bunch of animals, saying, "I would rather my daughter dated a member of MS-13 than a member of the Republican Party." And you might guess that the response was a little bit out of sync with reality. It's clearly a joke, but Trump supporters and Republicans did not recognize that. Fox News did not recognize that. It's kind of hilarious. He also hosts the podcast 49th Parahell, where he talks to a variety of leftists and discusses current events. So I'm going to send you over to that right away. I don't have much else to say, except if you want to send me any feedback, then you can do that at mail@brainstormblog.net. And if you feel like this show is worthy of your support, then you can give us $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. I sometimes worry that our per episode payment format on Patreon is misleading, but I try to get an episode out every Monday. So if there are 4 Mondays in a month, then you will get charged 4 times. And if there are 5 Mondays, then you will get charged 5 times. You can place a limit on your monthly pledge. So if you're only comfortable being charged 3 times per month or twice or even just once, then you can set that limit. I absolutely understand that everybody has different financial abilities to pledge to a podcast. Any amount of patronage gets you access to the bonus content. I try to have a bit of an extra conversation with my guests that I can put out for patrons only, and you get that even if you pledge $1 per episode and limit it to 1 payment per month. I don't want to gatekeep my content too much, but I still need to give a little extra to people who give me money. So that means that patrons of this episode will get an extra 20 or 30 minutes of conversation between Rob and myself after the end of the main show. So I think that's everything. You all know the routine. I will do an outro and thank new patrons at the end of the episode. And so with that, here is a promo for some other podcast and then right into the interview.
If your skepticism is socially conscious and doesn't take itself too seriously, you might like Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Also, I shouldn't have to say it, but vaccines don't cause autism, and Andrew Wakefield is human garbage.
As we've covered on, I feel like half of our shows.
We can just start every show with that statement. Andrew Wakefield is garbage, you are listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
No, it would have to be Andrew Wakefield is garbage, fuck capitalism. You're listening to Life, the Universe, and Everything Else.
Life, the Universe, and Everything Else. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else.
All right. Welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast, Skeptic Studio. I'm speaking to Rob Rousseau today. Rob is the host of the 49th Parahell podcast, as well as you're like a legit journalist, right?
I'm not sure I would say that. I guess I'm more of like a commentator or a shit disturber or provocateur or whatever you want to say. I don't actually do the work, the stuff that journalists actually do. I have not, or don't try to pretend to be like impartial or do that kind of thing. So yeah, I wouldn't go that far.
All right. I got the impression from following you that you actually do a little bit of journalism and you're commenting on a lot of things and you have quite a following actually.
Yeah. This has really just kind of developed over the last year or so.
Is that right?
I've been on Twitter. I've been on Twitter a long time, and for 95% of that time, it's been pretty much just like screaming into the void or whatever.
Right.
Just this last year or so, though, I started really pissing off people on the right, which led to me getting featured in conservative media a bunch.
Oh, yeah.
Which led to a whole lot of, interesting folks getting in touch with me. But also people, started paying attention to what I was doing and stuff I was saying. So really just in the last year, it's been like a huge amount of growth in the following, which has been pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, if you're pissing off the right people, then you're doing something good.
Well, that's what I tell myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been kind of following the right for, I don't know, gotta be a year probably now. I kind of always thought that the conservatives were kind of those idiots over there, and I just would try and keep pushing forward for, my own political agenda. And the last year or so, it's really seemed way more dangerous to ignore them. So I started interviewing like David Nywert and talking to Jared Holt and people like that who actually specifically track the far right. So I wonder, like, what do you think of the far right and in Canada?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, especially, paying attention to America. The kind of really scary thing about the Trump era it's not just Trump, but just the type of elements that were really, I thought, fringe and not people you should be taking seriously. Even a couple years ago, all of a sudden taking over these like mainstream roles in like American discourse or in politics. So that's been a little bit, that's been one of the things that I think shocked me a lot about the Trump era. And then paying attention to the Canadian right, I think it's the same kind of thing. I think there's kind of an element of we're always kind of trailing behind the States politically and culturally by a couple years. And I think we're seeing a lot of the same stuff right now in Canada that we were seeing in America, like throughout the Obama era, 2012 to 2014, right, maybe, where you have all these fringe elements that, I mean, the parallels are really striking to me, how they think that Trudeau, who's this kind of like middling centrist dipshit, they think he's this existential threat, this like far leftist guy who wants to like, destroy Canadian society.
If only he was more left.
Yeah, I would think that would be great if he was that. If he was this like open borders communist, I would vote Liberal in the next election. But
yeah, for sure.
That's obviously if you actually have any sense of like political history, that's not the case. But yet, these people are still developing kind of a really outsized voice in our discourse. And what's I think concerning is the way that they've like ingratiated themselves with mainstream conservative politics. And I get the sense that, go ahead. It's very striking, like how similar it is to the same exact thing in the US. Like the far right fringes slowly but surely kind of just put themselves into mainstream conservatism, and now the entire movement is reactionary. Yeah, and similarly, we're having an issue with where our sort of media establishment in this country are really proving themselves to be not at all equipped for this moment. Yeah. They're not able to call these folks out for what they really are. They take a lot of their criticisms about the media instead of just saying, well, these people are completely full of shit and we should ignore them or push back on them and try and do what we can to stop them from rising. They take these kind of bad faith criticisms on board. And what they'll do instead of pushing back on these narratives is they say, oh, well, they think we're so biased, so we need to hire more conservatives and we need to make sure that we're giving their viewpoint, equal time so that they don't think that we're biased. But what they don't realize is that the narrative is going to be the same on the right, no matter what they do or no matter what they say. They're going to be the far left, media that's just there to marginalize conservative voices and to, basically be liberal state media. They'll never change what they think about that, no matter what they respond to it. So That's the kind of thing that's concerning me, is that we have a media and political establishment in Canada that so far has proven to be, I think, completely unequipped to deal with this current moment.
Yeah, I was listening to I think it was Front Burner or The Current this morning, and they're talking about the promises of Doug Ford and where he's lived up to them or where he cut when he said he wouldn't cut. And it occurred to me that we have this thing in Canada where people don't like the centrists, they don't like the liberals, so they move to the right all the time. And it just, that's never the answer. And the media and really caters to that.
Yeah, and the right is always kind of given the benefit of the doubt when they make criticisms about the economy, or when they make like, I think this whole SNC-Lavalin scandal has been a good example of that, where it's like the Conservatives have tried to turn it into this big scandal and talking about the corruption of the Liberal government, and a lot of that is kind of true. But the idea that they would be any different, that they're going to treat these private companies like with toughness, this is just complete horseshit. But no one in the media can say that. No one in the media can say, oh, the Conservatives say that they're going to be great on the economy by doing X, Y, and Z, but they can't say, like, well, every single time they've been in control of the economy, their like voodoo economics hasn't ended up working. You know, they can't call them out like this.
Yeah. The joke is that the Conservatives, you just never would have heard about it.
Yeah, exactly.
They just corruptly let the corporations do whatever they want, and nobody speaks out of turn.
Yeah, and just, you know, they're able to sort of style themselves as looking out for the little guy and looking out for workers, but meanwhile, like, when they actually have power, what do? They cut social programs that workers rely on. They throw, like, teachers and nurses right under the bus. And, you know, it's like, how many more times does this cycle have to play out before people stop taking them seriously when they pretend to be good for workers or good at the economy? We know what their idea of being good for the economy is, which is the exact same thing as America, which is we're going to cut taxes for the people that do not need tax cuts the most, and we're going to screw over everybody else. And it's frustrating seeing this kind of exact narrative play out time and time again. Yeah, and for people to take them seriously when they talk about these issues.
So, what do you foresee happening in the election coming up here? Is this going to be a conservative government that wins the election?
I think, like I was mentioning earlier, the idea that we're kind of just a few years behind America politically and kind of culturally, I think that holds a lot of weight. And I think if you can just bet on everything to get much worse, that's a pretty safe bet. I think
that's depressing.
Yeah, well, we live in a depressing world. And I guess I was not really sure about this upcoming election just because I find Scheer to be such an empty suit and so uncharismatic. Yeah. And Trudeau does have a certain kind of like charisma, even though I don't like him. But I think a lot of the parallels with the Obama era and the Trudeau era are really striking, as I was saying. Right. The way that he's taken all the sort of progressive enthusiasm that was kind of behind him when he got elected, and there was a lot at the time, based on his talking about the environment, talking about reconciliation with Indigenous communities, talking about electoral reform, and he's kind of just systematically thrown all these activists under the bus and just squandered all of this enthusiasm that was there. So you have a lot of people that are more on the left, more progressive, that maybe wanted to give him a chance last time, that I don't think are going to do so this time around. And I don't think the NDP has done enough to pick up the slack there. No way. And put themselves out there as the option for those people that are dissatisfied. I'm hoping that once this election kind of kicks off, they will make more of an effort to put themselves out there like that. But just what's been going on the previous 2 years doesn't fill me with a whole lot of confidence that they're going to they're going to put themselves in that position with enough time left on the clock to really make an impact, or to put themselves out there forcefully enough and not try to do kind of a wishy-washy kind of move to the center thing, which is what these kind of the people in charge of these political parties always seem to think is like the best calculus to win elections. I don't have a ton of confidence that they're going to do what they need to do to actually win.
Do you think that Maxime Bernier's People's Party is going to have any impact at all on the votes for the right?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's a chance that they split the right vote. But I also think he's kind of providing space for Scheer and the Conservatives to really go off the deep end.
Yeah.
And pulling he might just be, and this might have been what the whole plan was from the beginning with this, is just to make sure that he signals to them that there's a constituency out there that really wants them to go full on all the way to the right, as far as they can go.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the impression like that he leaves room for Scheer and the Conservatives to be like, oh, well, we don't like racists. We don't do anti-immigrant racist stuff. That's his party. But all those people that are right now propping up Maxime are going to vote Conservative.
Yeah, and the fact is that they have been going very far to the right when it comes to immigration. I mean, they've taken the situation at the United States border and turned it into this crisis, which is, it's not a crisis. There's no fucking immigration crisis in this country, but this is the narrative that they've created. They've taken Trudeau's sort of very middling response to climate change, which is like, okay, we'll do like a carbon tax. This is like a conservative approach to climate change, right? This is
that's free market capitalism.
Yeah, exactly. It's market based. It's like, let's slightly regulate the market, and then we'll stick with that kind of system, and this is what's going to lead us out. They've taken this approach and framed it as this, again, like this communist takeover of our government, and they're riling up their constituencies, their electoral constituencies, based on the idea of even doing this is this terrible thing. So their response is that we need to do, nothing at all, or
even less,
like we're seeing with the Doug Ford government or the Jason Kenney government. Do the exact opposite, continue doubling down on all the exact same things that are leading us to complete environmental catastrophe.
Yeah, or the Sask party here, they just, keep fighting against the carbon tax in court for some reason.
Yeah.
Such a bizarre...
Well, it's because they've put themselves in the situation where they've told their constituents that, this is this dangerous government takeover. It's going to, destroy your savings. It's going to raise your gas prices. So then once they kind of create that narrative, well, then they have to be fighting it. They have to show how willing they are to fight it, or else, what's the point? That's how they prove to their constituents that that's what their plan is. And it's all great for them if they can get people to vote for them because of this, but it doesn't really bode well for our future and our kids' future. And that's the kind of scary thing about this political moment, because Trudeau has really failed, I think, and we're leading into a situation where these people are going to have a whole lot of political power in this country in terms of the Ontario government, the Quebec government, the Alberta government, and possibly the federal government. And that's not going to be great for Canadians. And I don't think this is going to be a situation like the Harper government, where it's like, Harper was awful, obviously, for a number of reasons, but, he only felt he could get away with so much. He couldn't, go kind of full-fledged towards the right. And I don't think that a current conservative government, if they take power, are going to have these kind of restrictions. And I think these people are going to come for a lot of the things in our society, like our healthcare, that we kind of pride ourselves on. I think all this stuff's going to be on the table.
No, I hear it from people that I speak to on a daily basis, like that, they toe the line already of the, oh, well, I shouldn't have to pay for somebody else's illness. The way that people talk about healthcare down in the US, it's already
it's the same kind of thing too, where it's like once these people don't realize that how much they're benefiting from this system, or they think that like I should benefit from it, but not everyone else should benefit from it. And that's not how it works. And they're going to realize pretty fast that once these things start getting taken away, that they made a huge mistake. But what we're seeing, like in America, where, I think some working people believed Trump when he said, "Oh, I'm going to, fight back against these trade deals," and the way that these elites have kind of like shipped all these jobs overseas. These are all real problems. And they voted, I think some of the Trump's coalition voted for him because he was talking about these issues and talking about how he was going to solve them. Obviously he hasn't. He's done the opposite.
Right.
But how many of those people are then willing to say, okay, I was wrong. I got duped by a con man. No, a lot of them are still just doubling down, and they're seeing how he, owns the libs or whatever, and are saying, well, that's good enough. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in Canada if the Conservative Party takes over in this country.
Yeah, it reminds me, like years ago, there was a study or something that came out, and it showed how people, if they've voted for a party or they identify with a political party, the way they actively do math will change. Like 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 if you're a conservative, and the Conservative Party says that it equals 5. Right? So, and I mean, I know it works both ways for every party and left and right and everybody, but it just seems so obvious that the misinformation on the right is so detached from reality. Yeah, well, like I was saying, with this, that you see like the yellow vests starting to become one of the first real like social movements we've seen in this country in a while, and a lot of their demands and problems are based on just complete fiction, like stuff like the whole like UN migration pact and all this stuff. It's just complete nonsense, and we're seeing like a right wing media establishment start to take shape in this country in the form of Rebel Media and some of these other Facebook based things like Ontario Proud or whatever. And we're seeing that start to take more and more of a role in our media landscape. And it's the kind of same thing. It's like we were, I think, kind of immune to this for a while, but it's starting to happen in this country too, where there's this complete alternate conservative dimension that's opened up, that these people can just shuffle off into, completely shut off the tap when it comes to other sources of information. They just get their information from the Rebel. They just get their information from whatever the fuck, yellow vest Facebook groups that they're in. Right. And this creates a real problem when you have this fractured electorate who can't agree on the same basic set of facts about what's happening in our society. Because then how do you kind of create a governing coalition that includes everybody? It becomes impossible, and this is by design. Yeah, you can't even disagree on like the implications or the policies because you're not even working from the same worldview, or you're just not existing in the same world. No, again, these people think that Justin Trudeau is this like far leftist who wants to open up the borders, who wants to destroy the oil industry. And again, if this was all true, I would vote for Trudeau, but none of that is true. That's right. Yeah. So, it's impossible to have a conversation with these folks because you're not agreeing on the basic reality that you're both living in. Yeah. I wonder, because we've always had certain elements of that far right. Like we had Sun News came in for a while, and Rebel Media has been around for a long time. Ezra Levant he's had time to build up this media thing that he's got going on now. And I just how did we not notice this 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Or did people notice it? I think it's just like you said before, man. Like, I knew these people existed. I knew like in this country, and even though they're much more marginalized, but even in America, I just think, a lot of the things they say are just on its face, just so preposterous that you're like, well, really, no, not that many people can take these folks seriously. Right. There's always going to be kind of fringes and fringe political movements.
But like, obviously these people will never actually amount to anything. They'll never actually achieve any kind of real political power, because that would be ridiculous. But then 2016 happens, Donald Trump happens, and it's like, oh, now anything is possible. You know, we've seen now that like these fringe elements can all of a sudden be in charge of like the levers of power in your society. And I think that was a big thing for me, seeing that happen in America, because it's like, okay, we have to take these people seriously. We have to take seriously the possibility that things can really, really go off the rails. And like, one interesting thing happened in the beginning of the Trump era, which is that, you know, Trudeau at that point was still pretty popular. There was still kind of that kind of glow around him, and a lot of kind of elites, both in politics and in the media, internationally, were kind of holding him up as the example of, see, like, we can still have these kind of centrist guys in charge that are going to make nods towards social justice issues, or make nods towards gay rights or trans rights or indigenous rights or the environment, while also still, you know, delivering profits to corporations. You can still have that. And Macron was another example when Macron was elected to say, like, see, this center can still hold. But like, if you take a look at France, what's happening right now, and you take a look at what's happening with Trudeau's prime ministership right now, it's like, oh, this is not sustainable. This is not going to work. And that's the thing. That was the big kind of shocking thing for me, where I said, okay, now we have to, like, the left in Canada has to get our act together now. We can't wait until we're in the fucking conservative hell world to then start, oh, maybe we need to start maybe getting organized now. We need to right away start to create an alternative vision that makes sense to people, that can explain the reasons that things in our society are not delivering results to sort of average people. Because if that movement isn't there, then the right are the only ones that are going to be providing those kinds of solutions. And even though that they're completely full of shit, their solutions are not based in the same reality. The solutions often are going to make the actual problems that we're talking about worse. If there's one side that's saying everything's fine, let's just keep doing things the way we've done them always, and there's one side saying we want to just completely rewrite the rules of what's possible. If you're someone that's struggling with debt, that's not able to afford a home, that's not able to get a good education anymore, well, those people on the right are going to be appealing. That's an appealing message, unless there's another social movement out there that's providing that same answers. And that's why I kind of started to get really concerned. That's why I think that both the left on the street in Canada needs to start getting organized right away, and in politics. And I think I've been a little concerned with the speed at which that's not really materializing. And that's why I'm kind of pretty nervous about the future of this country at the moment.
Yeah, like I've been a part of what used to be called the skeptical movement. I don't know what they call themselves now, but because YouTube skepticism kind of ruined it for everybody. But the skeptical movement always fought misinformation through, like, the goal was to fight misinformation through education. But it seems clear that that's not working now. So we need to, like, almost promote an alternate vision of the future, and then show people that what we can do to make that happen.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been kind of another kind of interesting wrinkle about the current moment in America, is this idea of, like, how sort of like YouTube atheism and skepticism that was kind of becoming really popular around maybe 2007, 2008, how that's kind of spun off into this really dark way. Like Sam Harris is a good example. I think throughout the Bush era, you saw in America the power that, like, these Christian fundamentalists had over society. And in 2007 or 8, Sam Harris was a voice where it's like, wow, this guy is kind of willing to kind of go against that, to talk. And a lot of people, I think, got pulled into that kind of worldview. And then slowly over the last, like, 10 years or so since then, he's kind of like gone off the deep end in the other direction. And he's been like, hosting, talking about like discredited ideas about like race science and promoting like really ugly, like toxic Islamophobia.
Like he's taken his Murray like skepticism on his show
and is starting to, has gone so far off the other direction that he's helped lead a whole kind of generation of people that I think maybe got involved in these ideas with good intentions, right? And kind of just led them to another far right movement themselves, and often, especially when it comes to Islamophobia, aligning with the very fundamentalist Christians that they maybe were opposed to at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. It's really actually disheartening. Like, I was pretty entrenched in that community for a long time, like the atheist movement. And just to watch some of these people that I was allied with suddenly agreeing with like Christian fundamentalists who like think you shouldn't have to sell a cake to gay people. Like, how can, it just blows me away. It's it's
the kind of thing too, where you have to follow the money. A lot of these folks are getting funded by like people like the Koch brothers and the Mercers who fund Breitbart News and the Prager guy. And I think these guys realized that you had a certain element there that was really ripe to lead astray. And a lot of these guys that started in this kind of skepticism movement or the atheism movement are now basically being paid to just promote pro-corporate talking points. It's just conservatism, but with the sort of overt Christian fundamentalism stripped away. But politically, they're fighting for all the exact same things. And they've developed these huge audiences that they've brought along with them into that kind of like constituency.
I know there was people like that noticed it way back, even like 5-6 years ago. They said like, I'm out of this because it's become a cult of personality rather than a movement about critical thinking. So some people noticed it. I was a little late.
No, of course. But that's why I think voices like yours are important too, because I think a lot of those ideas that started these movements are still important for people. And I think the more voices like yours that are out there that kind of take some of those same ideas, but don't spin it off into this, basically like pro-corporate mumbo jumbo, that's really important to have these things out there so people know that there is, there is still a movement out there that promotes a lot of the same values, but is also not just, repeating Koch brothers talking points at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder, like, we have certain, I guess, YouTube and like e-celebrities in the Canadian right as well, like Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern. These were all people that kind of formed their following online too. Like, I don't know, is there some way we can, I guess this is the way we can counter that, is by just putting our own content out to some degree.
Yeah, and it's odd, isn't it? The amount of Canadians that are like involved in that kind of alt-right or the intellectual dark web movement. It's bizarre. I don't really know what the reason is for it.
I don't know how that happens.
No. I mean, part of it is just a lot of these folks are just grifters, and they see where the audience is, and they see that they can profit from it. But I don't know. I don't know what it is about the Canada that's like leading to some of these people to be involved in these movements. I think it's just, like as you said, they see that there was an audience out there and that they can just go after it. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I wanted to start doing my own show, start getting my own voice out there, just because in terms of pure volume, the right just completely like outweighs anything that we're doing. And if you look at YouTube, especially with the way the algorithm works, you're one click away from just getting pulled into this right-wing ecosystem. And it can be completely innocuous. You can click on something completely innocuous that can lead you through the recommended videos into this complete like right-wing environment where you have all these folks like Dave Rubin or whoever, all of a sudden now introducing all kinds of, pretty extreme and dangerous ideas. And then once you get that, then you get the next steps into the InfoWars Rebel Media thing, and then you're off to the races into pure just like right-wing conspiracy theory fantasy land. And you hear horror stories about people that are just like have been pulled into this like that, and not everyone is able to kind of extricate themselves from it. So that's why I think I wanted to start, having my own voice out there, connecting with other people in this country and in America that are doing the same kind of work, and start building up like a media ecosystem online that's going to be an alternative to that, because we've been getting our ass kicked, and hopefully it's not too late to start providing that alternative. Yeah, but I think the more people that are out there talking with each other and making sure we're countering these folks' ideas, it's going to be much more difficult for them to draw in the same kind of crowd that they've been doing, especially when it comes to, like we're seeing, like with the alt-right, especially like disaffected young white men that their economic prospects are not what they were sort of promised they would be. Right. Yeah. They're like kind of antisocial from growing up with video games and growing up online. They're kind of angry about their lot in life. And if, like with anything, if there's only one side providing answers for why these problems are there, they're going to get pulled into these movements. And that's why it's dangerous how a lot of these right-wing guys are kind of positioned themselves as like lifestyle gurus or people talking about Jordan Peterson talking about self-improvement, self-help. This is what's pulling these young people, young men especially, into these movements. And unless there's voices out there that are providing an alternative message, that's just going to continue happening. So that's one reason why it was important for me to start getting my own voice out there and start being a part of that alternative.
Well, I think that's actually something that I've really enjoyed about your show, and I've seen it now from a couple other podcasts, is that like this exposure to like a left community that exists in Canada that a person just didn't hear about before. Like I've got an event I'm going to tomorrow night here in Saskatchewan because of the leftist content I've absorbed online that motivated me to, meet local people.
Yeah. And that's so important because, I mean, you can talk on podcasts all you want and connect with people, but that's the goal, I think, is to convince more people that we need to get out and start taking part in social movements in our own communities. And I think that's what you said is absolutely right, is that I think people, even more progressive people or people on the left in Canada, over the last, 10, 20 years, have gotten really, really complacent. And saying, especially when you look at America and look at the kind of political struggles that they have there and how fucking stupid it is a lot of the time, and how, they can't, they're just scratching and clawing just to have like basic health coverage. It's so easy, if you're a sort of more moderate or more progressive Canadian, to just kind of say, well, things are going okay here. I don't really want to rock the boat too much.
We're superior to the Americans, therefore good enough.
Yeah, exactly. We've got our health care. We've got, we were told kind of in school talking about how inclusive Canada is and how diverse it is and how we cherish multiculturalism and stuff like that. And I think you always kind of believe that myth about Canada. But then once you start sort of poking around at the edges of that and maybe talking to people, more marginalized people in Canada, immigrants and refugees, Indigenous folks, and you realize, oh, we don't live in this utopian society. Maybe it's been utopian for me because I'm a white middle-class man.
Right.
But if you start looking around the edges of society and the people that kind of have slipped through the cracks, you realize, oh, it's not like that at all. And that there are people in this country who are trying to struggle for like basic dignity and basic rights. And even recently with the immigration stuff, as it was kind of playing out in America, the whole Muslim ban and everything like that. And what was the narrative at that time too? Trudeau says, "Oh, we welcome everybody. We have our doors open to everyone," and everyone just take those words and holds it up as an example of how much better we are. But when you actually start looking at the immigration system in this country, we've got the detention centers. We've got the detention centers filled with immigrant families. We have people falling through the cracks in all these systems. We've got indigenous communities that don't have access to like basic amenity, like fucking clean drinking water, stuff like that.
Yeah, like there's I can't remember the numbers, but isn't it over like 100 indigenous communities in Canada don't have clean drinking water?
Yeah, it's absurd, and it's a disgrace, honestly. And if you look at our prison system, obviously it's not as barbaric as America, but it's still extremely racially biased. We still have a huge amount, like percentage-wise, of indigenous folks in prison in this country.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that I think people like me maybe really didn't think a lot about over the last, since I've been alive, basically. And it's only once you start talking with other people on the left in Canada, start talking especially to other marginalized groups, and you realize how many of these problems are also here in Canada. And even if it's not as bad as America, that's not really an excuse not to try and start talking with each other about how we can make things better.
That should be like almost the bar is that low. We should be over it and keep aiming higher. Like that's the low
exactly.
end. Let's be better.
Yeah, and that's it's not enough to just say, well, we're better than America.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to just say like, oh, let's just kind of make sure that our politicians aren't messing with the rights and freedoms that we have. I think now is the time to say like, well, let's start asking for more. Let's start like demanding that our politicians are accountable for things like the way our indigenous communities are mistreated. Let's start asking, let's not say, oh, well, let's be satisfied with our healthcare system the way it is now. Let's start asking for, or demanding rather, pharmacare. Let's start demanding universal health coverage, mental health coverage. Yeah. Things like that. These are the things that like, I think right now, talking with other leftist and other progressive people, I think it's not enough just to sort of go on the defensive and try and stop the far right from taking over. It's the time to go on offense and start demanding more from our representatives, and not letting them get away with just saying, well, things aren't as bad as in America. We need to start demanding more.
Yeah, and even like with climate change, like, yeah, okay, a carbon tax might be a start in some ways, but we need to fund green projects. We need to like work towards renewable energy instead of just...
We need to fully decarbonize our economy.
Well, yeah,
this is not something that you can do piecemeal, and there's not enough time left on the clock to say, well, we're going to do that in 35 years. No, we don't have 35 years.
Yeah.
So, these are the kind of things that we have to start demanding from our representatives. And that's why I think it's so important, the kind of internal stuff that's going on with the NDP right now, is we have to show them that there's a constituency out there that's going to respond to them being a lot more bold and unapologetic than what they have been. Obviously, electoral politics are not the only, they're not the only way. It's only a small part of like what we have to do in order to make the kind of changes that we want. But I think that's going to be a big start, is showing them that like, not only is this kind of middling, moving to the center and these piecemeal reforms, not only is that not good enough in terms of like what kind of society we want to build, but also it's not a winning electoral strategy. That's not going to win you power in the first place. So it's a losing effort on both ends. So the way you need to resolve that is to just start going on the offensive, start being bold, start being completely unapologetic, and fighting for these things and presenting a genuine alternative vision to what the political reality in this country has been for the last 30 years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not holding a lot of hope out, to be honest.
No, well, neither am I. And a part of me thinks that, what I really wanted was for us to kind of get our act together before we had the kind of nightmare conservative takeover. But I think similar to America, it's going to take that for us to really realize what's at stake. And for people like me, for instance, to stop fucking talking and actually start getting out onto the streets in our communities and start actually, demanding a better world. This is what it took in America. That's the only kind of positive thing you can take from the Trump era, is that it has animated a whole lot of activism, a whole lot of movement on the actual left for the first time in like a generation in America. And that's what it's going to take here, I think, unfortunately. It's just, it sucks because so many marginalized folks are going to slip through the cracks and are going to be really punished by that kind of a government. But I think ultimately that is what's going to be necessary in order for comfortable people like me to start realizing what's at stake and to start actually really fighting for something different.
Yeah, until things get so bad that it affects like your middle class white families, like then they'll just let the things keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to get to that point. I mean, like, it's becoming basically a fantasy for like middle class, younger people like millennials and younger, to the idea that we're going to be able to like easily afford a home. This is just basically, we realize now this is a complete pipe dream that's never going to be an option for us.
That's not a thing.
That's one way. No, it's not a thing. And that's what, that's what's going to wake more and more people up to what's at stake here. And especially, we're talking about the environment and realizing what the future of this country and the future of the planet is going to look like if we don't start, trying to enact real, like, radical change with the way that our society works. Unless that's there, people aren't gonna get off their asses to start trying to do something about it. And when I talk about this stuff, I include myself in that,
right?
Because I like to talk a lot. I like to kind of get my voice out there and try and change people's minds. But ultimately, people like me have to start doing way more. In terms of building these social movements that it's going to take to enact this kind of change.
Yeah, I've been actively online for quite a while. I've been running my podcast for 5 years, and this is probably the first time I've actually considered like, okay, I'm going to get out and I'm going to go on and to go to events, and I'm going to go and protest. I'm going to participate in this.
Yeah, and well, that's what it's going to take. I mean, when we're talking about kind of radically transforming our energy system, these people in the sort of elites in any party, they're not going to make the kind of change that we need unless they see that there's like people demanding it, not just at the ballot box, but like out in the street, that's like affecting their bottom line. And that's what it's going to take.
To see us.
Exactly. And left-wing parties in this country also need to see that, like, if they go in that direction politically, that they have people that are going to respond to it. Because if it just looks like it's a complete political dead end for them, even if it's the right thing to do, they're not going to do it. A lot of the real radical change that's going to need to take place over the next 10 years, that's where it's going to take place. It's not going to be in Ottawa, in Parliament. It's going to be on the streets in our communities. And, that's the only way we'll ever get the kind of real radical change that we need to, not only like avert climate catastrophe, but to like build a actually different society and a better society that's more inclusive and that can, achieve all these kind of things.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So I guess
easier said than done, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I guess something that we're getting close to. Wow, it's 45 minutes now. Why don't we talk about your show a little bit? What is 49th Parahell? Where did the name come from?
Well, I mean, in what I do, I talk a lot about America. I'm really like influenced a lot by what happens in America. I mean, for a long time, I was paying much more attention to what was happening politically in America than I was in Canada, which is kind of like, I think it's common, but not super helpful towards what's actually happening here.
Yeah.
So really, I just wanted to try and come up with a name that kind of indicated to people that what the show is about, just in one quick, quick hit. So it's like, you kind of get the impression it's about America, but it's about Canada as well. It's about the hellish nightmare world, all that stuff. And I guess that's it. It's just, I saw the excitement on the left, in the sort of post-Trump era, and the amount of people that were starting to get active and involved and start talking with each other. And I realized that there was really a space in this country for that kind of those kind of conversations to start taking place here. It's not happening on CBC. It's not happening in the newspapers that are still there. And I thought to myself, I really want to start getting involved in these conversations here, and not only to radicalize more people, to make people in this country get out of this sense of complacency that I was talking about, to convince people that we need to start fighting for these things. And that's what the show is all about, is that I wanted to start taking part in some of those conversations. And in addition to getting those conversations started, I had this kind of gut feeling that we were headed towards a similar kind of conservative takeover. And I think if that moment comes, there's going to be even more people, especially young people, wondering what has happened. How could this happen? And I wanted there to be answers out there for those folks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wanted to have something that's out there that you can say, okay, well, what the fuck has happened to this country? And if you turn on my show or your show or some of the other like great Canadian sort of leftist podcasts that are out there, like Dog Island or Alberta Advantage, now there's an infrastructure that's there that for these people that are going to become more and more aware of the ways that we're getting like increasingly fucked, there's going to be answers out there for what has happened. Not only what has happened, but what we now need to do in order to unfuck things. So that's basically that's what I wanted the show to be.
It's a laudable goal.
Yeah.
I wonder, it occurred to me, you might have some insight. What happened to the Yellow Vest movement as it is in France versus what happened in Canada?
It's a great question. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about Les Filets Jaunes in France is that there's no real governing political ideology. There's far right elements there, but there's also far left elements. So, I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing about that movement is these kinds of like contradictions that are there.
Right.
And when I started to kind of see that happen, and I said, well, this is kind of also could be kind of an exciting thing if we saw it come to Canada, but it's just been immediately co-opted by the far right.
Yeah.
And not even the far right, but the really loony conspiracy theorist QAnon crazy stuff. And that is not a bedrock that you can build a like large scale social movement on that includes all these other different elements, because who would want to be associated with that?
Right. Yeah.
So I don't really know how it happened, but that seems to be what has happened. And as I said, it's a shame because when you're seeing the effect that it's having in France in terms of like the large scale social unrest that it's showing the elites in France and everywhere that like this kind of status quo is not going to work. It's not sustainable. That's why I think it's so important there, but I don't see it making that same kind of leap to this country, because I think it's already just linked in people's minds with this kind of really out there far right movement, and there's not really any way to build on that.
Yeah, there's no way to reform it here now, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed when I was researching the Yellow Vest movement a couple months ago, there was some stuff going on in London where there was like the Yellow Vest movement that was the far right, and there was actually a Yellow Vest movement that was like counter to that. So they had at the time kind of two versions of it, and France had like far right elements to theirs, but it was always it would always had that leftist type of vibe to it, like, or it has in large part. And I don't know. And here we just have the far right attach themselves to it, and nobody countered it, and that was just the way it went. It seems like.
Well, and it's the far right, but it's also just like completely animated around the Conservative Party's goals, like the mainstream Conservative Party. Yeah. And you've seen like mainstream Conservative politicians giving nods to these people and speaking at events with them. And embracing those far right elements, as long as like, oh, you believe in this like QAnon stuff, whatever, as long as I can make you upset about the carbon tax or like Trudeau's migration policies. Yeah, oil pipelines. Like, this is not, these people have been just been completely duped into thinking that they're part of some like antisocial, anti-government movement, when really they're just like parroting Conservative Party talking points. Like, there's nothing like just being pro-oil pipeline or being like anti-immigration. Like, these things have nothing to do with one another. It's just purely like Conservative Party orthodoxy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I guess we'll end this part of the interview. For patrons, we'll probably chat for 30 minutes for bonus content. Where can people find your stuff? And yeah.
I'm mainly on twitter.com at Rob Rousseau. You can find me there. Again, you can listen to the podcast is 49th Parahell. You can find that on Twitter as well. And that's where I basically am on a daily basis, just kind of making people mad. And
nice, yeah.
And
you got a website and all that?
No, just Twitter.
Just Twitter?
Just Twitter, and the podcast. So if you want to find me, you can. That's where you can find me. Yeah, exactly. And SoundCloud and all the other podcast apps and everything.
If he a fascist, I'ma bash his head in. Cock it back, boy, and put the lead in. All you evil forces with your tiki torches, shove them up your ass.
Okay, so that's it for the main part of the interview. Like I said before, patrons get an extended interview that includes a bit more casual conversation for about 30 minutes. For those who are patrons, I'm going to send you over to that conversation now. And for everyone else, here's a quick plug for our Patreon, and then I'll do the outro.
If you like what we're doing and want to help us keep the lights on, go become a patron at patreon.com/Brainstorm Podcast. You can hear the bonus half hour that we record every episode and get a shout out when you support the show. Become a patron for just $1 an episode at patreon.com/Brainstorm Podcast. Or you can support the show by ordering a t-shirt, mug or other gear from our store at caffeepress.ca/Brainstorm Podcast Gear. If you can't afford to become a patron or buy gear, then why not give us a rating or write a review on iTunes or Stitcher? Every rating makes it easier for people to find us. Thanks for your support.
All right, so I have a couple things to mention before I close this out. First, I want to thank our new patrons, Sienna Watson and H.J. Hornbeck. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Freethinker215 and Lisa Simpson Support American Atheists for increasing their pledge. My apologies to everyone for taking so long to thank you. I really appreciate your support. So obviously I owe all our patrons a thanks, but I want to give a special thank you to our top patrons, Rob Geiger, Daryl Goosen, Richard Lounsbury, Aaron Young, and our top patron, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much. If you want to join them in being a top patron, then you can do that by signing on to patreon.com/Brainstorm Podcast and becoming a patron at skeptic level or higher. I'm not sure if everyone has heard it yet, but the song Save Yourself from Dave's new project, Femme Fragile, is available on all your favorite streaming platforms now. So make sure to check that out and support his talents. It's a really good song, and I personally can't wait until they put out more stuff. I'm accumulating feedback for the next live show, so if you want me to read an email, comment, or a review on the air, then make sure to get it to us by Friday, May 24th. Of course, I'm not going to read anything shitty on the air unless it's to point out that it's shitty and that the people who say it are shitty. So unless you want us to just make fun of you, then try not to be an ass. I do want to mention one bit of feedback that I got through Patreon from Freethinker215 and Lisa Simpson Support American Atheists. They said, thanks for the shout out in episode 80, Context and Empathy with Tom Curry. The Brainstorm podcast is my 21st favorite podcast of about 80. Keep up the great interviews and in-depth discussions. Well, Freethinker, I appreciate that we broke the top third of your list. I'm personally subscribed to about 150 podcasts, but only listen to about 20 hours a week. So I get that not everybody gets into the top 20. I'm just glad to be included. I think that's everything. So I'm going to start up the outro music now. For all the things, you can check out the show notes on our website, brainstormblog.net, and our hosting page, thebrainstormpodcast.com. Thank you to our financial supporters. We finally hit that 20 patron mark, so I won't be reading off the names of all the patrons anymore. Only new patrons and patrons at the skeptic level or higher. If you want to support the show and help keep me focused on putting out content every week, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can do a one-time donation at paypal.me/brainstormpodcast. Or buy some gear at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. I think we've got some great t-shirt designs there, but that's probably because I made them. Our next live show is actually going to be this Friday, or not this Friday, but May 24th. We skipped our May 10th show because everybody was sick. But our next live show is planned for May 24th, and our guest is Yvette Detremont, the Psy Babe. She's going to, talk to us about science and porn. So look forward to that. If you want to check out her website, it's scibabe.com. I want to thank Rob again for joining me in this episode. I will include a link to his SoundCloud page and anywhere, maybe iTunes, or a couple links to find his stuff in the show notes. And make sure to subscribe to his podcast. Check it out. You hear some really cool Canadian leftist voices, and leftist voices, like voices of informed people from other places as well. It's just, I really appreciate the Canadian community of leftists that I'm just now learning about. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabinowitz from Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space for doing the voiceover for our intro. You can find his stuff at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our subreddit, share the show, and spread the word. The more you share, comment, and like our stuff, the more it helps the show grow. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.